What's up guys, this is Goatman5000. Today we're back for another action figure review, and today it's a super special one. We are looking at the McFarlane Toys Masterworks Kickstarter Spawn. This is the classic version, and really just a very interesting story with this figure, and it's something that you really had to be in the know, and you had to get in at the right time. This was a figure that you had to purchase on Kickstarter. It is the remastered, reimagined, modern version of the first ever Spawn figure, and like I said, this is the classic version, but they also did offer a modern take on Spawn with the similar kind of packaging. And they also offered an artist-proof version, which is just the figure cast in all gray, and all three of those had different accessories. On top of that, if you bought all three, or if you bought two of each, you actually got accessories with that too. For me, when this was out, I wasn't willing to spend the money on so many of them, so I just got the classic. I definitely wanted it in, but honestly, after fiddling with this guy for a little bit, getting the accessory shots and opening up the box, I almost wish I got all three. But I did need a good classic 7-inch style Spawn, and there's no better figure, I think, now than this one that we have in front of us. And this Kickstarter, it wildly blew all the expectations. They kept on adding in extra parts, and you can tell they had a lot more budget to just play around with. As you can see, it's this big, elaborate, slipcover briefcase style. I don't even know what you want to call this thing. The slip cover has some beautiful metallic red kind of varnish painted Spawn on the front of it. It's done in a beautiful matte black. You lift that up, you're getting this kind of almost briefcase style, or like a book. You open it up with this little red tab, and then on the inside you're getting some foam inserts. And I should mention too, when you get this guy in the mail, he's coming double boxed. There's a big box, inside of that is another cardboard box with some plastic spacers in between it. So absolutely no cost was spared when it comes to packaging and also the shipping of this figure. Once you get to the inside, you're greeted with a certificate of authenticity, as well as a comparison which shows you what comes with the original figure versus the remaster, and also kind of a thank you from Todd McFarlane Productions. So some really cool pieces there. As you could see, the foam insert sits on top of the actual figure box, and you're getting some bonus accessories in there which were not originally intended to come with the figure, but because they went over the budget, they were able to include them. And then once you take that out, you're greeted with the very classic McFarlane looking packaging. This looks just like the original, the classic Spawn box. You're getting the comic book in the back of that box. And I didn't even know about this. I thought it was just going to be Spawn #1, but it's actually some sketches of Spawn #1 with some explanation, some behind the scenes from Todd McFarlane, as well as in the back you're getting a lot of original information about the toys, and that's complete with an advertisement for the first wave in the back. So really cool. I'm gonna have to sit down and read through this. Finally, once you take that out, you're left with the figure in the clamshell. It's some awesome resealable packaging. Obviously, you're gonna have to break some ties, but otherwise you can get everything back in the box if you really wanted to. But overall, it's probably the longest I've ever spent on packaging, maybe only rivaled by the Hellfire Club from Marvel Legends. And with that, we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna take this Spawn out of the packaging, and we're gonna get a closer look. And here is Spawn out of the packaging, and he does come with a bunch of accessories. It's not the most in the world, it's not overwhelming, but all the accessories are very useful, very deliberate, and I think they're all very well executed. We'll start out with the alternate hands like we usually do. On the figure, you're getting some kind of opened up kind of magic hands that Spawn is known for. These are good for posing. They remind me of like his Mortal Kombat 11 intros maybe. You're also getting a pair of fists, but these actually have a hole that's going through them. That's used for one very specific purpose, which is this necroplasm piece. This is one of the bonus accessories from the outer box, and it has a peg inside of it that actually goes right into the fist, so it can look like he's kind of wielding some magic, and it kind of overlays the hand a bit so it kind of blends in well. And what's also pretty cool is that if you have the Mortal Kombat 11 figures, it's going to fit right in those hands too, because they are very similar. And then finally, we do have some weapon holding hands, and you gotta have weapon holding hands because this dude comes with some of the coolest weapons you can get on a figure. The one that comes in the box is this awesome assault rifle, and it's got just about every attachment you could think of. It's got multiple scopes and sights on it. You got some kind of under barrel attachment, and you got some bladed weapon that's coming out of it, multiple triggers and clips, and you can see there's some silver paint all over this guy, some gunmetal. So a really cool weapon. I've been using some old Quake 2 figure weapons for my Mortal Kombat Spawn, so it's really cool to get an actual gun that looks like this, because that's really something very important to the character and to the old school McFarlane Image Comics look, is these big elaborate weapons. And then moving into the bonus accessories, the ones that again came in that outer box, we're getting a dagger that's made of the same necroplasm, the same green material. I haven't taken a look yet, but it almost looks exactly the same as the Todd McFarlane Batman dagger. So I wonder if it's actually the same piece that they kind of creatively used. That was obviously done in gold, but I think it's the same piece. And then probably my favorite accessory of the bunch is this gigantic broadsword with all sorts of ornate details down the blade. You got a Spawn logo on the top, The hilt has some green paint, as well as the little ball, the little pommel at the bottom. Just tons of sculpt, tons of paint, tons of detail, and the thing is gigantic. It's a big, like, breaker blade. And of course, this reminds me a lot of Medieval Spawn, the classic figure that came with such a large sword. And I think that's going to be one of the upcoming Kickstarter figures, because of how successful this figure was, they're going to be making more. And I think that's awesome. And if he gets a sword that's equally as cool as this one, that's even better. I forgot to mention, he also has the classic McFarlane stand that we've been getting with the DC and the Mortal Kombat figures, but this one, it has record-setting action figure Spawn from 1994, 2021, and then the little Spawn logo on the bottom. Finally, the head sculpts. We'll look at the base one right up here. We'll get a nice close-up shot, but the accessory, the one that's a bonus and that came in the outer box, is the hamburger head, the burned fleshy face of Al Simmons. He's got an awesome screaming effect. Reminds me of the HBO series in the intro. And this thing just screams old school McFarlane. You got some crazy amounts of sculpt in there, some black washes, all sorts of paint. And it really just looks like a classic McFarlane Toys Spawn figure, but just now with the added bonus of a few more points of articulation. And with that, here is the Spawn figure, the classic Spawn. All taken care of, all the accessories out of the packaging. And there's some weird things about this guy. I mean, he's highly articulated, but he's weirdly limited in some places. And that's kind of the unique story of this figure. But overall, even just like this as a shelf piece, I think this really is one of the best Spawn figures that he's ever made. And there's like 20 years of those old McFarlanes. Now, the one that this is based on is when they didn't really have their footing yet. They tried to make figures like everybody else, and I think that's why they went and made the first Spawn figure. They remade it in this style. But as we got further into like the early 2000s, those figures were basically statues, but they really innovated when it comes to sculpt, paint, and everything like that. And that's something that we're seeing the effects of with pretty much every action figure line now. And I think even if you're somebody that just needs like one Spawn, you don't need to get every single one, this one might be it. But enough talking, we've been talking for a long time. We'll get a closer look at him, and he's almost gonna be hard to review. As you could see, the cape is almost taking up the entire frame here. And usually with something like a DC Multiverse or a Marvel Legends, the cape is something we talk about very briefly. It's normally, we just mention that he has a cape. It might have some sculpt, it might be cloth, or it might be plastic. In this case, it's like half the plastic of the figure goes to this big cape, and the shape of it here looks just like the classic covers. Go ahead and try to turn him all the way around. He's banging into my set here, and you can see the beautiful sculpt. This looks just like the Todd McFarlane artwork, the shapes, the geometry of it all. Really is some beautiful stuff, and the added bonus of this figure, and I think something that came later on when it came to the budget and how they exceeded it, is that they were able to add a lot of extra articulation. So in this case, the cape can actually fold back if you want it to have less of a presence. If you want to fit him in with more figures, this will probably be your best bet. Obviously, we saw it fully extended, but it also can come all the way in, and he can kind of do a Batman style, kind of brooding. He can kind of fold the cape in, and you can get some cool poses and some cool photography done with that. Him perched on top of a gargoyle or something. So it's actually pretty hard to get him in any poses where his legs are squat, because the cape is going to be hoisting him up. I mean, you can kind of do it, but then the cape is just going to be a bit strange. Because it's not cloth, it's a big, heavy, rigid piece of plastic. There is not going to be any flex with it, any movement. So really the only things you're going to be able to manipulate are these articulated pieces. For the head sculpt here, it looks very good. There's a lot of details in there. It's almost too detailed. It looks like a modern Spawn head to me. If I go ahead and bring that in here, you can see it's a pretty similar shape. I mean, obviously it's the same character, but classic to me, I almost feel like he's a bit too dingy. The neck here is a separate piece from the head, and that's so you can swap out the hamburger head Spawn. You can get a better look at that. But when it comes to this, actually, it's separated by articulation. For the hamburger head, it's just one piece. Moving down into the torso, and I'll mention this now, one of my favorite parts of this figure is the real metal chains, the one that's attaching his cape, and then also these big heavy ones down at the legs here. And something about real metal chains on a figure like this is just super cool. Same thing with the Storm Collectibles Scorpion, where he's got his spear, his get over here, and also the Lobo from Storm Collectibles I should be mentioning. But really cool stuff. Love the real metal chains. That's also something that I know for a fact that he added later in the process because they had the budget to do so. You can see there's some beautiful shading in the torso here, and the torso is the #1 point of content, I think, for this figure. The most controversial piece, because it retains that original shape. That's not the way I have him posed. You could see he's just got like a slanted torso, and that's how the figure was intended to be posed. And when this Kickstarter started, there wasn't as much articulation here, and as we got further along, we got things like the double jointed knees and all sorts of articulation, but the torso never changed. It's just going to be stuck in that position. And honestly, I think the number one factor that he doesn't have torso articulation is because this cape is so ridiculous and heavy that I think it would instantly wear down the joint here, and I don't think the figure would be able to support the cape, and his back would be perpetually shifted back. So that's my theory on why he doesn't have the hinge in the torso, and for that reason I don't mind it. And for me, I'm not like a super poser. I do the figure photography at the end of these videos, but for the most part my figures are going to be standing straight up, and usually I just kind of do a pose with the weapons. Maybe I'll do a bit of a dynamic thing. I'll have the legs kind of bent or something. Then you move down, you got his trunks here. The skull is actually the vessel in which these chains are held, which is very nice. You got the pouches, because you can't have an old school 90s character, an Image Comics style, without having some ammo pouches all over the place. And with a gun like this, I'm sure there's plenty of ammunition for it. The legs here are a bit smoother, but otherwise feel almost identical in terms of how they articulate to the Mortal Kombat 11 figure. The main difference being because this is the classic version, you're not getting the big boot that would go here that's on the modern. And that being said, I really regret not picking up the modern Spawn, especially because I think that has an Al Simmons head sculpt, which is cool to me too. But I think these guys are going for some astronomical eBay prices, so this is what I'm stuck with, and I'm fine with that. I deliberately went for the classic version because that just made sense for my collection. I'm happy with the Mortal Kombat 11s. That'll be my modern Spawn, but you know, if I had a time machine, something like that. But overall, really impressive stuff with this Spawn figure. There's just so much here. There's so much detail. There's so much love and care put into it. All the sculpt, all the little spikes and chains and skulls. When it comes to that, McFarlane is absolutely top of his game, and especially with the budget and the amount of detail he was able to pack into this guy, this really is an achievement in that aspect. When we get to articulation, it's good, but it's not what maybe you would expect at the price point if you're expecting higher articulation. It's about the same as any other McFarlane Toys, and in a lot of places it's more limited because of how the cape is and the torso. And it's going to be difficult to kind of maneuver this guy in the studio here because he is so massive. For the head here, the neck and the head are on separate joints. So with that, we'll see. I think the cape is blocking it, but he's looking up that far. I mean, that's pretty good looking up. You can definitely tell he's staring upwards at something. That's certainly better than a lot of figures we've reviewed here on the channel. The head is going to look down pretty excellent because of that neck there. It almost seems loose, but that's just how it is. The neck buries into the torso. And with that, there's some pretty decent tilting action going on here. Now, when it comes to the arms, they're very limited because of how this cape is. So they're only really going to go up so far before the cape starts getting in the way. So not even a full 180, but it's almost there. He does have a cut at the bicep. And I will say, none of these are tight. They're very movable, but they do have a clickiness to them, or it's like just tight enough where they're going to make noise, basically. So you're going to hear a lot of that. The elbow is single jointed, but it has a pretty decent range. You can see it's going that far. And his hand just fell off. They got these gigantic pegs for the hands. With that, the hands are going to rotate and they're going to hinge. Like I said, there's nothing at the torso, but there is a ball joint at the base. So that's actually pretty decent, but the cape might actually limit where he ends up when you're posing him like this, but maybe you can get him in like a forward crouch if you really tried. But like I said, even you can see it here, the cape is going to be weighing that back most of the time. So a lot of the times the torso is going to be kind of always going to have that curve, but it's also going to be looking up a little bit. The crotch piece here is that rubber. It's almost becoming the new standard for figures like this, and it's especially the style of McFarlane. And you can see for the legs, it's what we're used to with a lot of DC Multiverse, with the Mortal Kombat figures. So he's still, despite being very premium and very different, he has a lot of the DNA from our modern McFarlane Toys figures like he should. So the legs have pretty much all the range of motion you'd want. I mean, kick back and forward maybe could be better, but again, with this cape in the way, a lot of these poses were limited even from the start without having issues with the legs. The double jointed knee, very usable, not the best looking, but that's kind of the McFarlane way. You can see they're almost going all the way back. He does have those McFarlane style ball joints at the feet that are noticeably absent from the hands. And then of course you do get a toe hinge. So overall there's a lot of familiarity, but there's also a lot of unique pieces here. So just a very unique beast that this Spawn figure is. And like I said, for me, the articulation isn't necessarily make or break, especially someone who has a few of the older McFarlanes. It's kind of what I'm used to, I guess, with these Spawn figures. And hopefully once we get this $20 7-inch super articulated line that presumably includes the Gunslinger and the Redeemer, hopefully we're going to get a really nice classic Spawn with all the articulation we're going to need. But that does just about cover everything with the Kickstarter Spawn, so I'm going to somehow try to get some figures standing next to him, and let's go ahead, let's do my favorite part, and let's do some comparison. And we'll start up with the Spawn figures that I'm sure most people own by now, and these are the Mortal Kombat 11 versions. As of right now, these are the only two that are out. There's a yellow version coming soon, but for right now, this is the classic, the original modern Spawn, and then this is the Blood Feud version, the kind of inverted skin, fleshy tone, I guess you could say. A lot of people call that Naked Spawn, but I quite like the look of that figure, and especially next to these two, he sticks out. But even already, this is just giving me almost chills. Just seeing these Spawn figures, how different all three of them are, and how much more we could get with the Gunslinger, with Medieval, with Mandarin. There's a million different types of Spawns, and I can't wait to just build out a whole collection, a whole shelf with these modern articulated Spawn figures. And then we'll bring in Todd's other premium line, I guess you could say. This is the Gold Label collection. And these two figures I reviewed in the same video. We got the blue Mandarin Spawn, and we have the Todd McFarlane designed Batman. And even with this, love how these figures look together, and this is just a sign of things to come from future McFarlane releases. And actually, since I have this Todd Batman here, you can see the daggers are different, but very similar design philosophy, I guess. You can tell they were made by the same artist. For some more DC multiverse, here is with some Joker figures, or I guess a Batman Who Laughs and a Joker more specifically. And since I don't have any figures of the Clown, these two are going to have to make do for fighting this guy in the figure photography. And since these two have met in Mortal Kombat, that's pretty cool, and that's another connection you can make with all these figures. And then finally, for a bit more DC multiverse, here he is with the Batman, the Grim Knight, which is, like I said before, one of the most Todd McFarlane looking things ever, despite being a Capullo and Snyder creation. And then for some flavor, here's the Infected Superman. And now getting really crazy, here's some of my favorite old school McFarlanes. We got the Medieval Spawn, and you can't really see it, but you can see he's got a similarly gigantic sword. And then here's the original Mandarin Spawn. And I know we're already getting this guy in the 7-inch articulated style, and it seems like this is going to be our next Kickstarter. So I'm all in. I'm super excited about this, and these really just look great together. And now getting to some truly crazy territory, but when else am I going to be able to bring up some classic McFarlane style figures? We got the Frankenstein's monster from McFarlane's Monsters, and then here's the Rasputin from McFarlane's Monsters. This right here, this is basically a statue or like a diorama, but it's one of my favorite things that I own. So I'm kind of just bringing it in here because I haven't looked at it in a while. And I don't know what the market looks like for remasters of these guys, but that's something I'd definitely be signing up for day one. But that's very esoteric, that's very kind of niche. But some really cool stuff. This is kind of a sampler of what McFarlane used to be. And overall, that is going to do it for the Kickstarter Classic Spawn. And I'm so glad that I backed this when I did, because those months ago when I was backing the figure, I did it pretty late. I did it pretty close to the end of the Kickstarter, and it was more or less an impulse buy, because I wasn't sure if I really needed it. Spawn's something that I've always kind of been into, and I had some of the older figures, but I didn't know if I needed this one. And I'm so glad I did. I mean, my love for Spawn has really grown since the time I pre-ordered it. I'd really recommend the HBO series if you guys are looking to get into Spawn. It's really the best representation of him, I guess, outside of the original comics. But Spawn being so linked to DC and now Mortal Kombat, really just a big amalgam of all my favorite things. So really happy to have this figure, but I might even have to track down the modern Spawn if I can find it for a not asinine price. So I would recommend this, but I don't know if there's really any way to get it other than eBay. So if you like what you see here and you're really a big Spawn fan, or like I said, if you just need that one definitive figure, I'd say go for it. And I think he's probably going to be worth whatever you pay. But that being said, it's going to be a lot of money, I think. And with how good this figure is, I can only imagine that the Medieval Spawn is going to be even a better Kickstarter in terms of how much they make off of it and how much they're going to be able to add. And then hopefully this is going to bounce into that entire new 7-inch articulated line like we saw with that Redeemer and with that Gunslinger. As always, I'm going to be taking some figure photography of this figure, and you can see my whole library on Instagram, scoopman_5000. Thanks for sitting through such a long and detailed look at this figure, and I'll see you guys in the next action figure review.